Welcome to Family History Mysteries, a podcast that tells the stories of everyday people and their families. I endeavour to continue publishing episodes ad-free. In order to do so, I would love your support by reviewing my podcast or consider becoming a subscriber for only the cost of a coffee a month. This gives you early access to episodes and also access to bonus episodes, of which at this stage there's over 30. Shorts episode number 5, Hidden Treasure. Ethel Pratten was the beneficiary of a hoard of treasures buried by her grandmother in her home at Newtown, Victoria. The treasure was discovered after her grandmother's death in 1906. Ethel Louisa May Pratten was born in 1889 in Fitzroy, Victoria. She was the daughter of Henry Thomas Pratten, who died of typhoid, aged only 30, in March 1891, when Ethel was only 2. And the death notice reads, at the 14th, at his residence, 223 Fitzroy Street, Fitzroy, Henry Pratten, late compositor of the Herald Office, from typhoid. Ethel's mother, Emily Louisa Clark, was the second of 12 children and was born at Campbell's Creek in Victoria. And on the 26th of January 1884, it was published in the papers her parents' marriage. On the 10th of January 1884, at the Primitive Methodist Church in Carlton, Henry Thomas Pratten, eldest son of Thomas Pratten, Newtown, Beechworth, to Emily Louisa, second daughter of Edward Clark, Spring Street, East Melbourne. In 1906, Henry's mother, Harriet Pratten, that is Ethel's grandmother, died. Harriet was born Harriet Flintham in London in 1831, and she died at the age of 75. She'd arrived in Victoria in July 1857 and married Thomas Pratten in 1860 when she was 29. Thomas was a storekeeper. They had 2 sons, Henry in 1861 and George in 1863. Thomas Pratten died in 1884 on the 13th of April, which was Easter Sunday, at his residence after a long and painful illness of 2 years. It states he was a storekeeper at Newtown, Beechworth, and was a native of from Somerset, England, and was 51. There was also an obituary on the 19th of April 1884, the late Mr. Pratten. Among those who have been removed from amongst us is Mr. Thomas Pratten of Newtown, who died at his residence last Sunday. He came to the colony as a fireman on the SS Tucson, the first Peninsular and Oriental Company's vessel that visited the colonies, and brought the first mails which arrived here in 1852 and went to Sydney. After remaining there some time, he, like others at the time, made a rush for the Ovens gold diggings and worked at Snake Valley, now known as Stanley, and afterwards what is known at present as the Upper 2 Mile at Pennyweight Flat. Becoming tired of mining, he started storekeeping at Newtown Hill and continued in that occupation till the time of his death. He was a man well liked for his civility and courteous manner, though he did not take much interest in public matters, but was willing to help when needed, and his loss will be felt by a large section of the community with whom he was intimate. He succumbed to an attack of heart disease and dropsy, from which he'd been suffering for some time, at 1 o'clock on Sunday afternoon at the age of 51, and leaves a widow and 2 grown-up sons to mourn their loss. And the probate came in for Thomas Pratten at £2,186. Thomas and Harriet Pratten's son George, that is Henry's brother, was unmarried, and he died of typhoid in Beechworth in April 1893. He was also aged 30, like his brother was. So the proceeds of the probate from Harriet Pratten's death went to her granddaughter, the only surviving member of the family. Harriet died in quite dramatic fashion. On the 6th of November 1906 in the Melbourne Age, it says, found dead on the footpath. The body of Mrs. C. Pratten was found on the footpath at Newtown on Saturday by the police. It was taken to hospital where the medical officer pronounced life extinct. The deceased, who was of penurious habits, in other words lived in quite a miserly fashion, was a widow and lived by herself. The police, on searching her premises, found £886 in sovereigns concealed in the chimney. It has also been ascertained that the deceased had sums deposited at various banks amounting to £600. The only member of her family now living is a grandchild. At an inquest which was held, the medical evidence showed that the deceased had suffered from Bright's disease and that death was probably due to bursting of a blood vessel in the brain. And 2 days later, Mrs. Pratten's hoard in the Melbourne Argus amounts to nearly £8,000. At Beechworth, a further search of the late Mrs. Pratten's residence at Newtown has revealed a plant of 10 sovereigns In a recess beneath a colonial oven in the kitchen, slips of paper found in different places note that other amounts are concealed, especially in a kerosene tin which has not yet been discovered. From information supplied, it's anticipated that of all of the sums are found, the total will probably amount to nearly £8,000. No will has yet been brought to light. And the next day, Mrs. Pratten's hoard. Beechworth. The search for further hoard money of the late Mrs. Pratten has concluded. All the amounts noted in the slips of paper corroborated with the amount in hand, totalling $3,936 in sovereigns, alongside bank deposits. Mr. Charles Barber, an old friend of the deceased, was the only one aware of the secret deposits. Sergeant Blade and Constables Gardner and Lewis were indefatigable in prosecuting the search. All the coin found has been accounted for and deposited in the bank. So in the Benalla North Eastern Ensign, on the same day, it announces in a little more detail of what they found. Buried sovereigns, £4,000 unearthed. Further information which has been obtained by the police with reference to the hidden treasure secreted at the house of Mrs. Pratten of Beechworth, the woman who fell dead on the street on Saturday night, induced them to dig in a cellar. After considerable pick and shovel work, the searchers came upon a nail can, alongside of which they found 8 jars filled with sovereigns. One of the jars contained 850, 2 others contained 250, and each of the remaining 5 held from £195 to £500, making a total of £3,040 worth of sovereigns. This extraordinary find makes a total of £4,526 in the estate. The only living relative of the deceased is a granddaughter, who has been found living in a Melbourne suburb and working for a small wage in a factory. Mrs. Pratten had 2 sons, both of whom died, and one of them, a compositor, was married and left an only child, already mentioned. The family are well known to ex-detective Sergeant Ward, who found the lucky girl's whereabouts. So on that same day in the Melbourne Argus, factory girl's good fortune. Miss Pratten, a young girl who for months past has been employed in a hat factory of Mr. Jensen in Brunswick Street, is the granddaughter of the late Mrs. Pratten and the sole surviving heiress to the estate. Miss Pratten and her mother, who for a number of years has worked as a laundress, are at present in Beechworth. So in the Benalla Standard, buried sovereigns, story of a girl's fortune. There is reason to believe that a factory girl of Fitzroy is about to find herself the possessor of a fortune. She's just 17 years of age and has for some time been earning about 10 shillings a week making straw hats at the factory of Mr. Jensen in Brunswick Street, and now there is nearly £8,000, which in the absence of a will must be allotted to this young person. About 23 years ago, there was a compositor named Henry Pratten, and he married a Miss Emily Clark. He built or bought, most likely built, a brick cottage in Fitzroy Street, Fitzroy, and had it labelled in brick letters Newtown after his native place. After 6 years or so, the happy couple were blessed with a daughter, but about a year and a half later, Henry Pratten died of typhoid fever. He had one brother who also fell of the same disease without issue. The Typographical Society extended a helping hand to Henry's widow, and by some legal arrangement the cottage was settled on the child with the mother as guardian or caretaker. The means of livelihood, however, were slender, and the widow had to battle at washing and ironing. Until last week she was still battling, aided by a few shillings a week earned by her now 17-year-old daughter at hat-making. Ex-Detective Ward knew Pratten and his energetic wife well when they kept a general store at Newtown, close to the Coach and Horses Hotel, and he says that the missus was the party who really made the business and carried it on. When her husband died, she was left in full possession. There were but 2 sons of the marriage, George, who was a baker, and Henry, the compositor, both of whom, as stated, died of typhoid. Henry's widow was the only daughter-in-law who might marry again at any time, but her daughter was the old woman's granddaughter and the only descendant she had. That she cared for her granddaughter is obvious from the fact that Mrs. Henry Pratten knew before the police unearthed the treasure where the treasure was concealed and told a relative by marriage all about the cellar that had been locked up for years. It might seem strange that a sensible businesswoman as the late Mrs. Pratten should have buried her talents of gold in the earth, but her eccentricity in that respect is accounted for. At the time the banks were nearly all failing and she was shrewd enough to rescue her money, then she would not trust the banks again. She thus saved a tidy little fortune for her granddaughter, unless indeed some will is discovered diverting the money in some other directions, which, considering the circumstances of the case, is rather unlikely. On Sunday night, a telegraph messenger knocked on the door of 223 Fitzroy Street and delivered to Mrs. Henry Pratten a telegram from a sergeant of police from Beechworth. That message informed her of the sudden death on the previous day on the footpath at Newtown near Beechworth of Mrs. Pratten Sr., her late husband's aged mother, and indicated that her presence there was desirable. On the following Monday morning, mother and daughter locked up their humble Fitzroy Street cottage and took a train for Beechworth and Newtown. In the Melbourne Advocate on the 10th of November 1906, the buried sovereigns, total value of the fine £4,034. At Beechworth, the police continued their search for more sovereigns on the premises of the late Mrs. Pratten Sr. at Newtown, discovered 10 under a colonial oven in the kitchen of the house, making the total amount of £1,034, 10 shillings and 8 pence. The number of sovereigns so far found is 3,944, the other amounts being deposited in various banks. The police with Mr. Charles Barber went carefully over the cellar, inch by inch, probing, picking and boring, and they are satisfied there's no further plant to be found. They also went through drawers, presses, cases and jars in the place without making any further finds. They now believe they have all the hidden treasure and have reported to that effect to the Curator of Interstate Estates. The deceased granddaughter and her mother are now in Beechworth. No will has been discovered. Mr. Charles Barber knew that the deceased had planted about 886 sovereigns 13 years ago, but he knew of no other plants. He was the only man the late Mrs. Pratten Sr. spoke to on the subject, she having nursed him as an infant. Her husband was known to be a well-to-do storekeeper in the early days. And on the 12th of November 1906, in the Maitland Daily Mercury in New South Wales, Ethel Pratten, the young Victorian who, if believed, will inherit the fortune found secreted in the house of Mrs. Pratten near Beechworth, is 17 years of age. She's the daughter of a widow who struggled for many years to earn, with her own funds, a living for herself and her child, and has reared the child so as to be a credit to herself and to the state. Now there is over £4,500, which in the absence of a will must be allotted to this young lady. In the Ovens and Murray Advertiser, a Beechworth paper, on the 17th of November 1906. Mrs. Pratten's hoard, statement by Mr. C. Barber. The various statements that have been published to me are misleading. The facts are these. Sergeant Blade sent for me on Sunday morning, November the 4th. I went to the premises of Mrs. H. Pratten and met the sergeant and constable Gardner on the footpath, and the three of us entered. I got the keys of the cellar doors. The sergeant and constable Gardner were with me. I opened a cavity in the foundation of the chimney and lifted out a small wooden box, also Keen's mustard tins. They contained separate bags. Each bag contained figures of the amounts enclosed. Each parcel was opened and counted into £10 and placed in rotation on the table and returned into bags and tied as before. The total amount found was £886 in gold. Constable Gardner found a nail can concealed underground containing savings bank books and other papers, but no gold. The sergeant opened the inside cellar door and was looking about striking matches. There was one candle in the house. We cut it in half, the sergeant one half and the constable the other, and I looking on. We never separated during the search. The sergeant found the first vault containing jars. One cork was raised and saw it contained gold. To the best of my recollection, the other jars were not opened. On continuing the search, Constable Gardner uncovered a second vault with jars. They were also lifted out. The sergeant put all the jars into a box and they were conveyed to the Bank of New South Wales, weighed by Mr. Hannaford and put into 2 bags, also sealed, until the next day, when at about 9 o'clock by appointment we met at the bank. The gold was weighed by Mr. Garrity, and the total being, as the night before, £3,040. I had no knowledge of these plants, but the sergeant found slips on the body indicating each jar and the amount contained in the same. The sergeant never told me this previous to the gold being found. I was searching for a will, but I'm convinced there isn't any. Ethel Pratten married Edwin Henry Gray in 1911 when she was 22. Edwin was a clerk and they lived at St Kilda. And on the 15th of February 1930, it announces Ethel's mother, Emily's death. On the 11th of February at a private hospital in St Kilda, Emily Louisa, wife of the late Henry Thomas Pratten of Beechworth, beloved mother of Ethel, Mrs. E. H. Gray, and grandmother of Edna and Thelma, aged 71 years. So Ethel and Edwin's first child was Edna Mary Gray, who was born on the 2nd of June 1912 in Clifton Hill, Victoria. And their second child, Gwendolyn Thelma Gray, was born in 1916 in Elstonwick. Gwendolyn married William Major Lamberg Simmons, a clerk, who was a widow in 1945. And Ethel died in 1959 in Mount Albert, Victoria, at the age of 70. So I'm sure all of us would love to be able to find a hidden hoard that we would be the sole beneficiary of, but this really did happen to Ethel Pratten. If you are interested in sharing your story on my podcast, Family History Mysteries, please go to my Facebook page and send me a message. If you would like some assistance in filling in the gaps in your family tree to see what mysteries you solve, please get in touch.